This week's guest is Stephan Schulze, and I was really excited to get Stephan on the show because he has a very unique experience. Not only has he scaled engineering teams at unicorns like Sender, but he's also invested in unicorns at his time at Project A Ventures, one of Germany's largest VC firms. And now, given his role as MD at A11, he has the fortunate experience of working closely with a lot of unicorn founders, CTOs, and engineering teams. In this episode, we dive into how AI is shaping the role of a CTO, how hiring practices are changing, and how the economics of a startup has shifted. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show with Stephan. Hey, Stephan.
Hey, good to
How
see
you
you,
doing?
Sean. Very good.
Likewise.
Very
Yeah.
good. Thanks a lot. It's a bit cold here in Berlin, so there's even snow predicted, but the rest is fine. I'm still waiting for spring.
You're still waiting for spring. I'm in London at the moment, and the sun is splitting the stones.
Okay, so I'm a bit jealous, to be honest.
There is no better place, I think, in the world than a sunny London.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
I'm biased. Great to have you on. I'm really excited about this conversation, Stephan, right? Because one, I think you've seen all walks of life, right? From an individual contributor, a CTO, MD, and investor, right? So I think we could cover a lot of stuff in this conversation. But where I want to start with, right, is look, you've been involved with, worked with, invested in like 80 plus startups, right, in the last decade, right? So you've got a good view of and good pulse of what was been done before and what now is becoming the new trend, right? So, how are in what are you seeing with companies, especially startups? How are they creating leverage with AI that they couldn't actually have before?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I think if you see that development, especially that speed up of what AI is capable to do compared to, let's say, even 2 years ago, right? If you remember, I think ChatGPT, like this large LLM, it came out November 2023, right? And I think when I talked to our engineers first, they were pretty much afraid, right? So this is going to kill our jobs. I think we come to that it may necessarily not do it now, for now, right? But I think especially for the startup world, it means, from my perspective, that it's way easier, way cheaper to start to build something, right? And you don't even need to have, like, at least initially, technical person aboard, right? So if you're just coming out of university, you have a, let's say, business background, you could still achieve quite a lot already without the necessity of having studied computer science, doing coding yourself, etc. Right? So it's super cheap and super fast to create any kind of proof of concepts, MVPs. So to get a bit of an idea whether what your idea is or has problem solution fit, right? So there's someone else having the same problem. And I think you can even, to a certain extent, make it to first version of a product in that direction and start to sell that. So I had a conversation yesterday with one of my former colleagues who is from the product management side, so you also know the technical side of things, but it's really impressive what he can do within just little small amount of time, and is pre-product already by just spending a couple of days, right?
Do you think that's interesting, right? Because on one side, yes, it's lowering the barrier for non-technical people to deliver MVPs, but do you also think it's raising the bar of what people expect when it comes to MVPs, right? Because before, right, when we were building observability, right, we could just show on the CLI or the terminal the logs coming in, and that was good enough. We didn't need fancy dashboards or all that, like as the MVP, as long as you could route the data in the right way. But I feel now that demo would be lost on people because they would expect more. Like, so where do you think the trade-off is?
Yeah, I think it's a interesting question. I think it very much depends on where you are in your journey, right? So if it's about getting kind of a bit idea of the market, or being able to kind of just test certain ideas with a smaller audience, I think this is where AI really speed up things, right? Also beyond that, right? But if you just want to get that first grasp, if you use something like Lovable, Replit, whatever the vibe coding tools are, it's impressive what you can create in a very short amount of time. I think expectations from, let's say, investors, clients, etc. Yes, they raise, and I think that's also something where you, as a founder, may trick yourself a bit, right? Because suddenly, and this is also what we see, obviously, is that you present something, and if you're very honest, that looks pretty nice already, right? But it's mostly quite a way to go until you really have a product that is then also really sellable to clients, right? Because it's rather a facade, if you want so. It's a nice looking facade. It also has its certain functionalities, but it's not yet a real product that you can sell to clients. And I think that is something to be careful of, and make sure that you need to get that understanding of what is eventually products that clients will pay for, right?
Right. So that's interesting. So, right, what you're saying is that because traditionally with founders, right, we would talk to our potential customers, we kind of sketch out something on a napkin, we would go away and build it, right? We would go away and maybe check up with them, show them. Or what you're saying is like now we can shorten that from a month or 2 months down to a day, 2 days, show them something, and then that'll help us validate. So when we do go really like investing in the engineering capabilities, we already have that product that is like there's going to be less waste, I guess, downstream.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's important to like distill between this is just a demo versus like, okay, this is the minimal sellable product, right? And they're two distinct things, right? They're not one.
Exactly. So I think the interesting part with that is, and I think people working with tools like Lovable, etc., they know the interesting part is, I mean, maybe necessarily only do not take you days even, right? So if you sit with if I think of a kind of a discovery phase, right? You're sitting with certain potential clients, your audience together, and what you can already do, obviously, is just say, okay, I understood that you have that and that requirement. Let's try to bake it into our, I call it facade, right? Or our existing demo, to get a bit of an idea of, okay, this is what you're looking for, or is it something else, right? And that is something that you can do even in like half an hour. And if you invest a bit of time with the potential client or the interested person together, then within very short time frames, you can develop the product really based along the customer needs and not what you understood, what you think the customer needs are. And I mean, we both know, right? Eventually, your clients typically also don't know what they want, right? So they have like a bit of an idea, but if you really go into detailed discussion with them, make it tangible for them, you can say, no, this is not what I intended to get, but this is the other way. Then that is super, super helpful.
Yeah, and that framing makes a lot of sense, right? Because your most valuable asset, well, there's in my world, it's time plus my engineer's time, right? So
Absolutely.
like understanding where you want to optimize is really important for developers rather than sitting down like a sprint cycle, and at the end of the sprint cycle, you're like, yeah, the customer doesn't actually need this, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, we've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah, and let me add, I think there's also certain risk in that, and I think that's kind of the downside of things, because what we see quite often as well is that, especially if, let's say, non-technical people use these tools, they think, oh, it's done, right? It was super cheap. I don't need anyone. But eventually, at least from my experience, every client that looks at such a tool, and I think that's the other side, it looks very fancy, right? It does kind of the trick, what you want it to do, but it's far away from done typically, right? And I think that is something that each founder should be aware of, that just by having like a nice looking facade, it's still just a facade. So it's nothing that is eventually done, that is shippable, that is scalable, and that allows for, let's say, certain security topics to be addressed, for efficient development in the future, maintenance, all of that stuff, right? So that comes on top afterwards, and that is often forgotten, I would say, because, hey, it works, right? So why do we need to pay more money to my engineers to now productize it or make it production ready, whatever that means, because I, as a business person, don't have an idea anyways, right?
Yeah. There's a saying in Ireland, and I don't know if it translates to German. It's called mutton dressed as lamb.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's I see a lot of that today. It was funny, right? So the first time I heard about ChatGPT was with your former colleague Jack, right? He
Mhm.
sent me a link, and it was like it blew my mind of what it could do, even the very early day, right? And
Yeah.
I've been obsessed with it since, right? But from an investment perspective, right? Does that change your thesis, right? If a tech company isn't default AI,
Mhm.
right? Does that sway you? Now, again, I know the answer is kind of it depends, like versus
Like
infrastructure versus
always.
application, right? But we'll say an application company, right? If they don't have an element or a strategy around AI, whether it is actually building with AI or it's part of their product, is that an automatic no for you as an investor, or like
Yeah.
how are you
Yeah,
thinking?
it's a very tough question. I mean, like always, it depends on the stage of the company,
Yeah,
on the team, obviously, and kind of the product that they're building, right?
yeah,
I think one fundamental thinking, at least from my side, is that I say, okay, if you're creating a company nowadays, right, building a startup, you're not making use of AI, then something is fundamentally wrong, right?
yeah,
So that is maybe kind of the core essence. So I would not even ask if people kind of use AI in a daily life or if there's an AI strategy, but I would rather assume that as a basis requirement of today's company funding and building. And I think, at least from what we see, this is also the case, right? So if you look at pitch decks, I mean, everyone has AI on it, right? So back in the days, it was like around blockchain and Web3 and I don't know what, right? Now it's AI. But that is one thing. I think on the other side, we also see that companies, especially early stage, I mean, they use the current tool set and just build their stuff. And the current tool set is AI supported or AI first even.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I met an investor. I was talking to an investor over a few beers last year, like late last year, and his take is if you're not AI or not using AI, I don't invest in you. And the second criteria he had is that if your unit costs are double, like if your costs are double than what you're actually charging for, I will not invest in you, because he said, unlike the cloud, you can't really engineer yourself out of like bad AI design and all that, right? Which I thought was interesting, right? Because before investors were looking at like growth at all costs, but I think now, because it's such an unknown quantum when it comes to like AI and non-deterministic, and even if you pile so much engineering resources, you might actually not recoup that thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how much more can we build to make it more valuable? So yeah, like, do you have any views about the unit economics when you're looking at startups?
Yeah.
Or
Again, it's a bit on the stage, right? I mean, eventually, I would rather prefer to invest in companies that have like at least an outlook on very good unit economics.
yeah,
But it very much depends, right? So if you think, for example, so one of the topics that I'm curious about at the moment is the whole physical AI, right? And that's kind of connecting hardware with AI, so robots, drones,
yeah,
whatever else, right? And I think the interesting part here is, yes, unit economics play a role there, but they will eventually come up when you go in mass production, right? So very early, it's super expensive, like with hardware
yeah,
anyways, right?
yeah,
But then later, in a later stage, if you go really with mass production, then they will pay out. And I think it's very tricky to anticipate that in
yeah,
early stages. But it's for sure something that you look at. And even if I translate that maybe into kind of the standard digital product offering, what are kind of unit costs? It's kind of the investment that you need to do to create a certain value, right? And the core question is, if I want to reduce that costs, that could mean in a, let's say, digital product, I have less engineers, less salespeople, less marketing people, because the team that I have is achieving the same like before, right? Just with less people making use of modern tooling. Or other way around, I have the same team size, but then I achieve more than that, and so also have better unit costs compared to kind of, let's say, 2-3 years ago.
yeah, yeah. And it's a conversation we have internally a lot at Cornell, right? And I won't say I'm paranoid about it, but like it's like, okay, if in the morning, right, the subsidies, like the AI companies have to charge more, because I think ultimately, if you read the redacted filings from Anthropic and
Yeah.
OpenAI last week, it was like, okay, the revenue plus their capex doesn't make sense, so someone is going to have to foot the bill, right? And it's like, okay, open weight models aren't there just yet, but still, they're an option, and hardware is getting better, and it's becoming easier to configure. So that's also an option.
Yeah.
But also just like the pipelines that you build around your agents can help you optimize that as well, right? It's not just like you let Opus 4.6 do everything. No, you can actually break it down and truncate it, right? Which I think it is an option, right? And I think if you have if you're a founder and right now your goal is to deliver value and find a product market fit, wouldn't really worry about optimization, but you should be asking your engineers, okay, what if maybe here's a scenario, okay, we have some kind of plans and we have some loose thoughts about getting there. So there's kind of like a loose thought about that.
No, and I think that perfectly makes sense, right? Because if you look at a token usage and also the payment behind that, I mean, if you kind of go back, let's say 3-4 years ago, right? Then I think the kind of large cost part was infrastructure, right? So if you go to AWS, Google, Microsoft, wherever, then people initially always said, okay, let's spin up a new machine, new infrastructure, and they didn't care, right? Eventually ending up with super high infrastructure costs, and then they started to optimize these things. That will still continue because the infrastructure is not gone, right? But now you have like a second battlefield, if you want so, and that's kind of token usage, right? I also read an article recently where companies are actually thinking about just providing a certain token amount to their development teams because it can become pretty expensive. I think at a certain point you need to think, is the outcome that you create with that, is it worth the invest, right? So that's a pure business decision. And assuming, I mean, that's more like a could be, but I don't believe in it, to be honest. Assuming that just AI tokens become more and more expensive, it could also reverse the whole trend, right? Because then you say, hey, it's too expensive to use it. I'm just going back to my old software engineering skill set. I'm coding myself and not letting AI write my code because it's overall way cheaper compared to making heavy usage of AI.
I see an interesting trend as well, Stephan, where and I speak to other founders and VPs of engineering. They're like, well, we're shifting from cloud to most of the hardware now is actually living on your computer, right? And you're running things more from your computer, and the cloud, although it's important, right, and especially for bigger companies and regulated companies, but for startups, most of the stuff that you're running now is not in the cloud. It's actually in your computer, right? Which is fascinating. And to pick up on something that you said there around tokens. So we had a conversation with the head of developer experience at TransferWise or Wise. They have I think they have 800 engineers, right? And they said that they were talking to the CFO and they were trying to like forecast their token and their budget for AI. And he said that like months and months and months they couldn't, and now they're getting better at it. But he was like, there's a trend where he saw it's like hype to burnout, right? So you see a lot of spike usage, and that's just developers one prompting or one shot prompting and stuff like that, which is inefficient. But as your power users get better and like you share that knowledge, they can see that the output tokens are actually going down and becoming more efficient, right? Which is, I just hope companies can get up there fast and then realize, okay, how to optimize it sooner so it doesn't actually burn, a big hole in their balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's interesting because it's that same kind of financial education that you most likely need to do also for the infrastructure part, right? Or anything else. I think the interesting question that I ask myself is, will we be at a point, I mean, you could always use kind of on-premise models, right? If you have the necessary hardware. But I think the incentives for AI companies to make you use less tokens, they are not there, right? And similar for the infrastructure part. The core question for me would be kind of the results or token usage is something that you have less under control compared to infrastructure. And if I would be kind of Claude, OpenAI, whatever, I even would think about, okay, how can I just increase token usage, because I don't want my users to be as efficient as possible, but rather to use as many tokens as possible to make use of my hardware investments, etc. Right? And I think that's going to be interesting where that will end up in. Let's see.
Yeah, and on the ROI stuff, right? Like I think we're all waiting for Wall Street or a big CFO on Wall Street to say, hey, AI has really like helped us drive revenue or cut costs, right? It's not just going to be like, I think a lot of layoffs in the last while have been attributed to AI, but really it's just companies over hiring.
Yeah, but it's
Where do you
interesting.
think where do you think the ROI is?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a tricky thing, to be honest, because right now I would rather see that yes, you do optimizations on also teams in kind of replacing parts of their workflow with AI. I do not necessarily see people being laid off because of that. And the core reason is two things. Mainly, I as a company would rather prefer to keep the team size stable, but just create more output or outcome, right? So that is way more valuable. I mean, if you need to cost cutting, then yeah, you need to do cost cutting, right? But it's a different story. But if I'm in a growth phase, I would rather not reduce team sizes. I just make sure that I just squeeze more out of the teams. And I think from an ROI perspective, I think what people mainly still forget in these calculations is, yes, AI costs, right? Token usage, because that starts to play a bigger role. And I think what we also saw, and I think if you look at Klarna, for example, very good example, right? So where they said, hey, we let all of our support people go because we become AI first, blah, blah. Eventually turned out that didn't work out. And I think AI is mostly not yet at a stage where you can really replace, at least in certain areas, human expertise, human knowledge, and also that interaction skills. It's not yet there. It's interesting, and maybe let me quickly add a bit to that. So I recently had a private project around photovoltaic, right? So looking into making use of sun energy, and I talked to multiple suppliers, and one actually optimized the process quite in a good way, right? And I got even a call from the AI saying, like, in very good quality, so not that shitty stuff that you hear sometimes, right? Really good quality, saying, hey, I'm the AI bot of blah, blah. I just want to make sure that the appointment is clear, that's going to happen, all of that stuff. And I think that is something where I see, at least at the moment, that's replacing people work, or rather shift the work of the person that normally would have called you to more valuable things, right? Because just calling, confirming an appointment is nothing where you really need a human. It's something you can also do with an AI bot, right? And that eventually pays out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Just switching gears a small bit, right? So
sure.
You've had a great experience in terms of scaling unicorns, right? And most notably Cinder. And that was kind of maybe pre-AI era.
It was,
right? And you probably had a different method of scaling, right? But if you were doing that today, right, like, are there things that you would have done differently?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the one hand, I would have applied or would apply all the learnings that I had in the past. So that's for sure.
Hindsight, yeah.
Exactly. I think there are some things that I would consider differently. Assuming it's the same challenge, and then maybe to kind of reflect a bit on what was the challenge, right? So we came in as operational team. It was a very small team of, let's say, roughly 25. Cinder was in its hyper growth phase, and what we made possible is to start with the 25 and grew up to, let's say, 145, 150 in, I think, 9 months or so. And if you think about that part, I think the first question that I would ask myself, okay, do I need the same amount of people, right? Or can I achieve the same things with less? And it connects a bit to the discussion that we had before, right? So what is the result that I want to create? And I think in such a phase that was in 2022, right? There it was about growth, right? And creating as much value as possible. And in that case, I would say, let's hire exactly the same amount of people, right? But make sure that we hire people who have a very good understanding of modern tooling. And modern tooling, back in the days, it was all about infrastructure as code, obviously, using the right data. So nothing very special. And I would even say, if I do the same thing today, there wouldn't be any difference in the general approach, because modern tooling nowadays, it's just more extended, right? So you need to know all the stuff that you need to know before, obviously, but knowing how to use that new tool, AI, have it in your toolbox, and be able to be efficient as possible with that as well, that would be another checkpoint in the hiring process. And so I would say I would hire the same amount of people, preferably in the same speed, and then just achieve more with that. And I think that then connects to a second point, and that is you still work with people, right? So it's nothing like let's say, a bot or something that is super productive from day one. It's rather something you need to onboard that people. You need to kind of make sure that processes work, that processes scale, that you form real teams, right? So if you think of these team forming phases of forming, storming, norming, performing, that wouldn't disappear, right? And yes, AI can kind of make the results or create the results faster. But if you don't understand the product, the technical setup that you have, if you can't connect and work with your team members, it's still an issue, right? And that is something we can become more efficient, right? And we can improve things on the process side, but it's still a thing. And that is still something that you need to take care of. And that's, to be honest, at least from my experience, is the harder part, right? So it's easy to hire plenty amount of people, but it's really, really hard to make that a well-functioning, performing setup eventually. And then, as said, so AI is just another tool in that.
Would you? I'm seeing a trend now where companies are creating not platform teams but AI enablement teams. Would that be part of that strategy if you were?
Yeah, definitely. So it depends a bit on how you look at that, right? So I mean, you typically don't hire like a homogeneous group or a group with homogeneous experience, and so trying to understand already in the hiring process. And if you think of let's say we have 25, go up to 150, it's like 125 people that you add, not immediately, right, but over time. But it's still, let's say, roughly 10, 15 people per month that just are added to the team, and all of them come with their backpack of experiences, etc. And I think trying to get all of these people on the same level of understanding in terms of experience with AI, for example, that makes a lot of sense. And it would definitely be one lever. And we had that at Sender as well, that you had kind of ambassadors of certain process technologies that just go in, help the team to perform better, and also create certain standards. And I think if you work with AI, I mean, coding with AI, it changes the role of a software engineer, obviously, right? So it's rather not writing the code yourself anymore, but it's rather planning, designing, conceptualizing, a lot of forth and back. And eventually, at the end, you say, okay, now we have a plan, we have an idea, start to write the code for that. But you also want to have that code being written according to certain standards, in a certain structure, et cetera, et cetera. And that is typically something where I would put people in that have experience with that can set the right standards, and then educate teams also how to become more efficient that way. So long story, but yes.
Yeah. And there's a famous French philosopher, and he said like everything changes but nothing changes, right? And like as you kind of hinted there, right, like humans are still in the loop, and understanding emotions, understanding how you get the best out of those people will not go away from a leadership perspective, and culture is big as well. And over the last week, I've talked to an organization that is all in on AI, right? And like they admittedly almost dangerously all in on AI, right? Because they're doing so much, they're shipping so fast that the ops team, who are already outnumbered, can't actually keep pace, right? And it's a different risk profile. And you've got a company that's on the other side of the spectrum, which is like, none of my key engineers want to even touch it, right? So I'm less worried about the people who are all in on AI, but like from a cultural perspective, what advice would you give to a head of engineering CTO that is trying to get their engineers on that initial step of just using something in AI?
I think it's a very tough topic, and referring back to when ChatGPT came out, right? And I had that conversation with our software engineers. I needed to force them really to say, okay, you are the kind of person, look into that, understand it, and try to kind of see what it eventually means. So the person investigated, played around, etc., right? And then we had a talk like 2 weeks later when the results were there. And it was very interesting because it was more an informational conversation we started with, right? And the first one was, okay, I was really afraid, but thank you, Stefan, for pushing me to look into that, because I'm not anymore, right? Because it obviously turned out, at least in 2023, it was like in the starting, right? It was already powerful. It could do things that was far beyond what people were used to do. But in the moment when you played around with that, worked with it, you also figured out what it cannot do. And I think that is a starting point. So I rather prefer people to gain get an opinion about things than rather, and that is something you can only do by practical experience, right? You can read a lot of stuff, but eventually the opinion forms when you do things yourself. And that would most likely be the first thing to do. The second thing is I would say force people into that. And typically, again, there's not a homogeneous group of people, right? So you always have these people who are more interested in certain topics. So maybe start to form like a small group of people who are interested in that, and start to work towards that direction to say, okay, we create classical success cases, very small ones, right, that make appetite. You try to understand where are pain points in the other teams, and then start to kind of slowly work on these so that they see, okay, there's a benefit of that.
How rootless do you get, like, Stephan, right? Because if you think about it, right, like, you've got a mandate from your CEO or their boards to say, hey, you need to be all in on AI, right? So you craft this strategy, and you've got engineers that maybe have been with the company for 5-10 years that have a lot of IP, but they won't get on board. Where do you draw the line, right? Of, like, if they're continuously resisting, do you say, okay, you're out, right? And kind of like forget that they've soldiered through the last 10 years, or do you, like, where's the balance there?
Yeah. Right? Very, very tricky question, because if you have engineers working with you for, let's say, 10-15 years, this also means that you have like a huge or larger system setup, legacy setup, right? And I think the core question here would be, I would like to understand, why are they so resistant? And the question is a bit, where are they, right? Have they tried and just figured out, okay, I'm still faster, I'm more effective in the stack that we're using in the system we are building, because, hey, that large code base written in, I don't know what exotic language, is nothing that AI can help me with. Okay, that's fine, right? And it's rather an idea of saying they are not against AI in general, but rather we need to find a way how to enable them to become more productive, even in that shitty setup they have. There are people who say, I don't believe in that shit, right? I never want to touch it. And if you force me, then I'm leaving. That's a statement as well. And I think at that point, you need to think about exit strategies at a certain point, right? Because if it's not based on opinion and experience, right? If it's not based on experience, but just I have an opinion, and I'm very strict in that opinion, then I think slowly these people need to be taken out, because what will happen, and this is what we see as well quite a lot, is you have a part of the organization that is kind of very open, trying things out, etc., right? But then you have a typically very small piece that is against everything. But this is also infecting the others, right? Because these are typically people staying with the companies for, like you say, 10-15 years already, right? They are kind of senior in their experience. If they say, oh, that's shitty, I won't use it, you're in trouble. And that's maybe the third part. I personally believe it's a tool like any other tool that you use as a software engineer. And what you at least need to do, and that is what I expect from everyone doing software development or working in the tech space, you need to know your tools to take a conscious decision when to use it, when not to use it. And if you're afraid of stuff, then let's openly talk about it. But if you just say, I don't use a hammer because I don't like hammers, right? It will block you and it will hinder you. And it also, and I think that's the third part, it makes you less valuable for the company. And all of the experience and everything, I mean, it's like, it has its time limits, right? And there will be new people to be able to get in that stack. And so you become less and less valuable if you're not keeping up speed. That is something that you need to understand on the personal side of things.
Yeah, 100%. And well, like, I was talking to the head of engineering at Canva, and he framed it really nicely. He said, like, there's a stigma that you have to get around. Like, it's actually okay to generate AI, like use AI to generate your code, even though you've, crafted your skill over the last 20 years. See this as an opportunity. See this as an opportunity, an extension of your knowledge, and see this also as an opportunity to say that I've got an employer that's willing to give me free reign over these tokens that I can explore, experiment.
Yeah.
You know, not other companies might take that approach or might not have the facilities to do that, right? So it's more of an opportunity than a threat, especially if you're a senior engineer.
Exactly. And I think one important thing, especially for senior engineers, is yes, okay, now someone or something else is creating the code. But we also know that kind of creating the code, yes, it's maybe a very fulfilling task. And I think every one of us like to just get into the flow and kind of create a great piece of software. But that's just one part of your role as a software engineer. There's multiple other aspects, and you just focus a bit more on these. That is also something that people very often enjoy, right? Because they suddenly have more time to think about concepts, to structure it right? So all of these things that normally come a bit too short. And maybe last addition to that is, yes, something is creating the code, but someone still need to look at that, right? And that is where your kind of 10, 15, 20 years software engineering experience kicks in, because you look at that. It's similar like a junior developer. You do code review, junior developer created that code, right? And then you look at that and you say, that is not, let's say, performant enough. There is maybe potential security issue in there. That is not the structure that we normally use, et cetera, et cetera. And that is where experience really, really counts, because the other company that you mentioned being fully in AI, if no one understands what is created there, how it's working, everything tied together, okay, then you're also in trouble, because then you're
more spaghetti.
Exactly. Then you're living on the top of a volcano, and it's maybe just exploding next week, but you have no clue because you can't read the science, right?
And it's like we've like development over the last, or programming over the last 40 years has like just gone up in abstractions, right? Like, you know, we had compiled languages, we have now JavaScript and web languages. This is just another abstraction there. And the most valuable assets in your company are people who understand the system, but understand then the value that it's adding to your customer and can quickly propagate that. So it's a new set of skills that maybe for a lot of engineers that, you know, need to learn. You know, so it's going to be, I think we're in for a very interesting 2026, right? The rest
for sure.
of 2026.
And that will continue, right? I mean, if you see the speed of development, it's insane. But I think on the other hand, we still need people in the loop. So it's not yet at a point, even if you have code review assistants and all of that stuff, right? It's still something where I personally would say, from a certain, that's maybe a risk perspective, right? From a certain risk on, I would like to have people understand what is or how does the system actually work. Because you can't call your customers, say, hey, our system is broken, but we have no clue why, so our AI tries to figure this out, right? So you want to sit together with people who know the system in and out and try to solve the issue, right?
No, a customer will tell you if something's broken, you know, if it affects them straight away.
Yeah, preferably
but
know before, right?
Exactly. Stephan, we're moving into the home stretch here, but I ask this to every guest, right? It's more about, like, I think we can get caught up in an echo chamber, right? And an echo of an echo chamber, right? If you go on X, you see that all these latest things are being published and whatever. But like outside of that bubble, like, you probably have a lot of access to really good information, right, about what you're seeing in the markets. Like, what are some of the signals that you think haven't made it to the mainstream yet, but you are really fascinated about, maybe worries you, maybe excites you?
I think there are two things that I'm currently thinking a lot about. The first one is that current transformer technology that we're using with the LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, etc., that scales very well with more resources in terms of compute capacity. The interesting part from my perspective, and that is something that I see also not being fully understood by let's say top executives, is they look at that and it looks fascinating and the results are very compelling. They sound very nice, but eventually it's statistics. And it's not statistics in a way to say, I know the result, and then going backwards from that, right? So if I, let's it's not a perfect example, but if I draw an elephant, then if we both of us talk about an elephant, then we know how an elephant looks like, right? And if we ask each other to draw it, then we know we have a picture in mind, and then we start to draw it back from there. That's not how an LLM works, right? So it always starts from the input. Yeah, it considers what you talked about with it already, and then it's finding kind of closest, most fitting next steps, and then it just reiterates into that direction. And for me, if you think about something like AGI, I can't believe that this is bringing us to AGI, right? So I rather expect that there need to be like another technology step going that direction. If you listen to Jan LeCun from Meta, who just founded a startup thinking about these world models, I'm rather on his side than on the other side. Where I think OpenAI just recently mentioned, we can go to AGI with the transformer approach. So, and I think that discussion is something that is a bit more technical discussion, and typically, let's say, top executives are more on the business side of things. But for me, that would be something I think they need to understand. High level, absolutely fine, not in the details, but it's something that is relevant. And the second part, and that relates a bit to that, is that whole topic of security. So currently, I started to read the book by Roman Jampoliski about AI security. So if you Google it, we can also share the link. He's an AI researcher, also originally coming from OpenAI. And what he kind of talks about is super interesting. And it's kind of the other side of the medal, right? In terms of, if you don't understand the system, how can you control it? What are approaches to make it maybe controllable, etc. And I think that's kind of similar with technology. First, you see all of the opportunities, then you turn around and see, oh shit, there's a lot of risk, right? And I think you need to understand both sides to kind of make the best out of that. In dealing with security, it's always like, it's costly. You don't see results, right, until you actually had an incident. Then you suddenly say, shit, should I have invested kind of that 20,000 euro per month or whatever a bit earlier, and not now being scammed, being blackmailed or whatever else, right?
Do you think, the whole shift left thing with cloud, right? Do you think actually shift left needs to happen?
I would say so.
Yeah.
And especially also in the AI part, and I think it's tricky, right? Because it's a non-deterministic system, right?
Exactly,
so the same input can create a very different output, and you have not really an idea why that happens. And I think there is research going on in that field to make that more understandable and also create kind of deterministic results. But it's in the beginning, and it's not as fancy as, okay, look, we can create more text, we can do agents, we can do research, but it's also something that is really, really important from our perspective.
Well, and guardrails were traditionally seen as negatives, right? Because it's like, the security team is slowing me down, or the SRE team is slowing me down.
Absolutely.
Whatever. But now it's actually paramount that this is actually to help you speed up, because you can generate all the code, but if it's still getting blocked in code review or QA review, that's actually going to slow you down. And
absolutely,
I'm in my workflow, right? When I'm vibe coding, right, something, right, and it's like hitting cursor run, and cursor's like installing these npm packets or whatever. I'm like, should I really go and investigate what these packets are, right? And when I go investigate, it's like just by some random dude in whatever state. I'm like, do I really trust it? It's like that some of those feedback loops need to happen there and then, right? And we can't just blindly trust open source either, right? So there's
exactly. And I think that open source topic is a very interesting one, right? Because you see currently all of the open source projects being flooded with AI created proposals of how to improve. And the majority of that is just AI slop, right? So it's someone started a tool, it's easy, right? And then they just find something, but there are humans on the other side who carefully still review all of that stuff, because they are responsible for that piece of software that's maybe used on billions of devices. Exactly. So that is something they